that's a deliberate choice. So it's not a choice of maybe if a more hawkish guy comes to the White House, we're going back to war. It's the whole system. It's not how hawkish the guy in the White House is. It's whether the guy in the White House and the ruling establishment is part of the globalist order, or if they are sovereigntists who want their country to prosper and have fair and cordial and constructive relationships with other nations rather than being the enforcer and the global bully. So that's the choice. It's not in the person or in the group whether they are more hawkish or less hawkish. It's really the choice of a whole system.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the WTFinance podcast. On this episode, I have the pleasure of welcoming back Alex Krainer. So Alex has worked as a market analyst, researcher, trader, and hedge fund manager since 1996. He's also the founder of Krainer Analytics and creator of iSystem Trend Following. So Alex, thanks so much for coming back on the podcast.
Thank you for the invite, Anthony. Good to be with you.
Yeah, really looking forward to the conversation. I know, we spoke about a bit over 6 months ago. We talked about really what was happening in the geopolitical sphere, and it seems like so much has happened since then. So I'd be really be interested in hearing what you're currently seeing in the world.
Well, that's a good question. And how long do we have? I think that the changes that we're seeing today in the world could be as radical as anything we've seen probably in generations, maybe in centuries. And what I'm referring to is seeming disintegration of the Europe-centric global order in favor of something else. I've suspected as much for a little while with the Trump coming to power, but I think that for the first time we have a concrete announcement of something like that coming from Kirill Dmitriev, who was one of the negotiators in Alaska last August when Trump and Putin met. And what he said was that they were about to announce some kind of a peace deal for Ukraine, but it's not just Ukraine. It has apparently 28 points. Nobody has seen those 28 points yet. But apparently it includes a whole change in Europe's security architecture. And for, at the very least, since the Second World War, Europe's security architecture has been basically based on the British balance of power model, where you kind of keep a lot of crisis flashpoint lying around dormant in case you need to destabilize some nation or a region. We've seen that play out in the Balkans, but in the 1990s, we've seen the beginnings of another war in the Balkans over the last 2 years since the special military operation in Ukraine started. But then there's also other ones. Greece and Turkey have always been kind of at loggerheads. Then you have Greece and Armenia. Then you have Armenia and Azerbaijan. Then farther to the south, you have Israel, who's at war with pretty much all of its neighbors. Then you have Saudi Arabia and Iran. And so basically from the Baltic states down to the Eastern Mediterranean, and then from there, the whole southern crescent of the Eurasian continent all the way to the Koreas, it's all full of these crisis flashpoints that have been created deliberately to be able to destabilize all these places. North Korea, South Korea, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan. Pakistan, Afghanistan. We had Saudi Arabia and Iran. We had Iran, Iraq. So it's been pretty much 2 centuries of permanent warfare on Eurasian continent. And so now if Kirill Dmitriev said that they have held secret negotiations since Alaska and that a new peace proposal is being finalized based on agreements reached in Alaska, and that those agreements entail a new security architecture for the continent, that's a very hopeful thing. And maybe these 2 centuries of forever wars is going to be replaced with an alternative which hopefully will give us permanent peace. Another significant thing is that in the immediate aftermath of the meeting in Alaska, Kirill Dmitriev tweeted that Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump will prevent the World War III from breaking out. I thought that was a very significant tweet because he didn't say should or might or could. He said they will prevent it. So that's, coming from a Russian. Russians are generally tend to be very careful about how they use their words. They don't just bluster and trash talk. They're careful about how they use language. And so the fact that he said that, I thought that was significant. And I think that now for the first time, I think this was announced yesterday or the day before, we see that they have been working on a solution, a concrete one, and it goes way beyond just Ukraine. So if that's true, that's a very hopeful sign. And I see no reason to doubt that it's true. Why announce it otherwise? And I have to say, I've ever since Trump came to power, I've had the impression that there were secret backroom channels between Russia and the United States, that they were coordinating policy, and that all this nonsense that, Trump coming out and saying, oh, I'm so disappointed in Vladimir Putin and I'm going to impose more sanctions on them and I'm going to sell weapons to Ukraine, that this was all distraction and misdirection for public consumption. So that's very significant, and I don't know what the consequences of this are. This is, but if we're changing from if we're changing from a post-World War II global order to something completely new, clearly there's going to be very, very significant consequences to this and very serious results. We're going to know when we know. Now we can guess, but one of the consequences will be adverse for European capital markets. I think that European sovereign, generally European bonds, British bonds, I think that they're going to collapse. I think that the euro and the pound are going to collapse. And so it's going to be very, very difficult for Europe in economic terms, and then as a consequence, we're going to face a profound social crisis and radical political changes, which I hope will not come in the form of civil wars and revolutions, but for sure we're looking at social uprisings in the very near future.
Yeah, lots to unpack there. So how would you see such an agreement being implemented? It seems very hard to imagine what something like that would look like.
Well, I think that Ukraine is on the verge of collapse. Zelensky's government is now facing something of a perfect storm, because not only are Russian forces advancing more and more rapidly, and Ukrainian defenses are collapsing everywhere. There's an extensive corruption investigation going on against people very close to Zelensky's inner sanctum. And it's inconceivable that he didn't know and okay those corrupt practices. So we're talking about embezzlement of hundreds of millions of dollars. Apparently, this investigation has been going on for 15 months. Last summer, Zelensky tried to squash it by simply disbanding this agency called NABU. I don't know exactly what NABU stands for, but it's basically Government Anti-Corruption Agency of some sort. So Zelensky tried to disband them by decree. It backfired badly. He wasn't able to do it. And so the investigations continued. And over the last, I think, pretty much week or two, this has gone out in public. And so one of his business partners and right-hand man, Mindich, he escaped to Israel. Another few heavyweights have been put in the crosshairs, and some of the results of this investigations have gone out in public. So now people in Ukraine are outraged. The level of anger is rising. So he's facing pressure from the public, and another problem is that the reason because these investigations have gone out to the public in Ukraine, their defenses are collapsing because people no longer want to fight. Why would you sacrifice your life to fight for a group of corrupt war profiteers? So we have the desertions from armed forces of Ukraine are off the charts. I think more than 160 soldiers just this year alone, in 10 months of this year alone. And they're also surrendering to the Russian forces in droves. So the result is that, Russia's gaining strength, Ukraine's losing strength. And so now Zelensky hightailed on a tour of Europe. He went to Turkey. He tried to rekindle the peace talks with Russia. I think he's in Spain at the moment, where he got some commitment of money and weapons and so forth. He needs to bring something good back home to preserve his life and his presidency. But I think it's the end of the road for him. So some kind of a peace deal is going to have to be implemented, an armistice, which is going to be on Russia's terms. So I think what's going to happen is that the next government in Kiev is going to return Ukraine into Russia's orbit, and it's probably going to become something like Belarus, an independent nation, but in friendly relations with Russia. And then ultimately it's going to get integrated into a Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and it's going to become part of the BRICS. I think that both the Russians and the Chinese will make significant investments into Ukraine. The Americans will as well. And all this, the defeat in Ukraine, could spell the end of NATO and the end of European Union. So when the Americans and the Russians announce a new and improved security architecture for the continent, I think that individual nations of Europe are going to be either willing or coerced to sign on to it, because they will have to. If NATO collapses, you need an alternative collective security arrangement. And who's going to provide it? It's not going to be Britain. It's going to be Russia and the United States. So, when you ask me how is that going to be implemented, I don't know exactly, but in the same way that, the Yalta Agreement was implemented, the Bretton Woods Agreement was implemented, the people just sit around the table, they define how things are going to be in the future, and then everybody signs on, and it happens that way. It's happened before, so it can happen again.
Yeah, really interesting. I think, the one thing you mentioned there is that really Europe hasn't been a part of the conversations at all. They've been one of the most hawkish supporters, I guess, of Ukraine and the fight against Russia, but they're not really in the conversation at all between the Russians and with Ukraine to try and bring around this peace deal.
Well, the Europe is not part of the conversation because that's what they wanted. They refused to talk to Russia. Until Donald Trump picked up the phone and called Vladimir Putin and sent Steve Witkoff and Marco Rubio to Russia, and they started talking to the Russians again, that nobody was talking to the Russians. Scholz refused, Macron refused, the British are refusing. They're all refusing to talk to Russia. And then, when Trump goes and negotiates with them, then they're all apoplectic that they're not part of the conversation. But they excluded themselves all alone. Nobody has done it for them. And then, nothing. They have nothing constructive to offer. All they want is to extend the war, to make sure that Ukraine continues fighting for as long as it takes for Europe to prepare, to rearm, to raise armies so that they could take up the war. So all they're talking about is war. They're not talking about peace. They're talking about ceasefire, a temporary ceasefire, because they want the Russians to stop pounding Ukraine so that Ukraine could, regroup and refresh their forces and rearm and go for another round. This is not in Russia's interest, but they're not talking peace. They're only talking ceasefire. And they want to, gain time so that Germany, Poland, France, they can all raise armies, rearm, and, hopefully orchestrate World War III. But I think that without the United States, that's unrealistic. It's not going to go well. It's not going to be successful. I doubt that they're going to be able to mobilize a lot of people into the army because nobody quite understands why we should go to war against Russia. They're telling us that once Putin is done with Ukraine, then he's going to march straight to Paris and to Lisbon and to London. But I don't think many people actually believe this. So, nobody really feels threatened to the extent that they would be wanting to sacrifice their children or their own lives to go to war. So Europe is not a negotiation partner. It's a weak, hawkish group of leaders who are, in addition, completely at odds with their own people.
Yeah, very true. It's sort of this bureaucratic class above that sort of thinks they are the best in guiding the region despite the will of the people.
Yes.
Yep.
Europe is the garden, and everywhere else is a jungle, and we need to go garden the jungle and tell everybody else how to live their lives. That's the mindset, unfortunately. But it's not it's not necessarily the mindset of the ordinary man or woman in Europe. It's the mindset of the leadership class, of the political class, which, in some strange way got selected for this purpose. The way the political systems work in Europe has evolved, but, at its essence, it's given us World War I and it's given us World War II. And, everything they taught us in school about how those wars happened was complete nonsense, utter complete nonsense, lies. The way First World War happened and the second one happened almost exactly the way the war in Ukraine happened. Somebody willed it for a reason, and they did will it, and they orchestrated it, and they made it happen. And they're trying to make it happen again. It's the same thing, same interest groups, same power structures, doing the same thing, and they don't care if 100 million Europeans perish. They will sacrifice them gladly to preserve their power structures and to regime change Russia, and then to use Russia as a bludgeon against China in the same way that they used Ukraine as a bludgeon against Russia. So I think that's not going to stop. They've been trying to do this to Russia for centuries now. Practically since the 12th century, there has been campaigns and attacks on Russian lands, and then there was a Polish invasion and Swedish invasion and Napoleon and Hitler and the Crimea War, and it's just like one thing after another for centuries. It never stops, and they never will stop until they're completely disenfranchised, which means a radical reform of the system, of European political systems, and a radical reform of the continent's security architecture.
Yeah, really interesting. So how do you see, what's happening in the Middle East and Asia, playing out as well? Because I guess the Middle East has sort of gone quiet recently, but there was potential for massive, escalation, and then similar in Asia as well. So what do you see now?
I think it's part of the same thing. I think it's two fronts of the same war, and I think that it's obvious that China and Russia and Iran as well have been wanting to reform the security architecture on the continent, and they have done so. Among other things, which is something I actually predicted in 2015 when Russia intervened in Syria at the time. And I thought, why should Saudi Arabia and Iran be hostile to one another? Why should they be at war? And obviously, the answer is in these balance of power politics. They're being instigated from outside. And I thought, okay, so if Russia intervened in the Middle East, then I think that the next thing that's going to happen is there's going to be peace between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And I kind of expected that the Russians would broker that peace, but it was the Chinese. But then we learned that the Russians started the process, and then the Chinese brought it to a conclusion. But this is one step in the direction of reforming the system and the continent's security architecture. So that is happening as we speak. Middle East is very, very sensitive. It's very delicate because there's Israel there. And in the United States, you have a very, very powerful voting bloc, which is the Zionist Jews and Christian evangelicals. And then you also have very politically active donor class, which are also strong supporters of Israel. And these are very politically active and very passionate segments of the American political class, which exert enormous influence in Washington. So, Trump has had to tread very, very carefully, but one of their objectives has been a regime change war against Iran. And that didn't happen. So there was no regime change against Iran. Trump, well, people say that Trump started the war against Iran, but I didn't think that he did. That to my mind was a fake war. Because if you compare what happened in Iran, so that was a handful of bombs and missiles at targets that were pre-announced 48 hours before they were hit, allowing Iranians to, evacuate and remove any sensitive materials that were there. That one, if you compare that one to war in Syria or the regime change in Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, those were real wars. this doesn't even compare. This was a fake thing, and I remember at the time I said we would know it was fake by the way Iranians respond. And Iranians also responded in a polite way. They hit one U.S. base. They pre-announced the strike. There was no casualties. They destroyed the radar base, and Trump thanked them for the courtesy of pre-announcing the retaliation. And then, Trump came out and said, like, oh, we completely annihilated their nuclear program, which, everybody knows that this isn't exactly true. But the reason why he said it is because the nuclear program was the justification for regime change war against Iran. And so once you remove the justification, then, why would you go to war against Iran? So he said, we annihilated it. So what he did is he annihilated the justification for any further military action against Iran. And in fact, we didn't see any further military action against Iran, even though, the Israeli government still desperately wants it, except they also understood that Iran can respond in an extremely powerful way, and that the Americans are no longer willing to fight Israel's war. So far, so good. It seems to me that Trump is finagling it. It's very important to look at the effects of their policies, of his administration's policies, rather than the rhetoric, because the rhetoric is vomit-inducing. It's misdirection, it's deception, it's vulgar, it's ugly. But in the end, like with Venezuela, which I suspected as much as well, the posturing is extremely aggressive. The trash talk is vulgar. But then you find out that throughout all these events, they're actually holding negotiations with Maduro regime. And we also found out that throughout these hostilities with Iran, they were holding negotiations with the Iranians, and that they were negotiating with Hamas, and that they made peace with Ansar Allah in Yemen. So it seems to, and I have to mention Bosnia and Herzegovina, because for me that was the litmus test. Because, when we talk about Israel, there are very important domestic constituencies that Trump needs to keep in consideration, both in terms of policy and in terms of rhetoric. Whatever he says, it can be easily attacked by these very, very extremely passionate people who love Israel. So it's hard to judge. Same thing with Ukraine, because, this is the pet project of the European powers and Great Britain, which are traditional allies of the United States. So, Trump couldn't just flush Zelensky down the toilet and be done with it. It took a little bit of footwork to get to where we are today. But the place that is not on anybody's radar and that nobody talks about is Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's an almost landlocked country in the heart of the Balkans, which has been dominated by British influence, not just these past few years, but for a long time actually. And it was obvious to everybody here. I'm now in Croatia, but we're neighbors with Bosnia and Herzegovina, that the British are escalating tensions and driving the region to war, because Bosnia and Herzegovina is crawling with British diplomats, spies, intelligence agencies, NGOs, charities, media organizations, public relations organizations, political polling organizations, you name it. They're everywhere, and they were in dominant power in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and it was clear to everybody that they were pushing the region to war. And even their think tanks, like RUSI stands for Royal United Services Institute. They were pretty much overtly, explicitly announcing that the Balkans would be the second front in West's war against Russia. And, people will remember that World War I started with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914, in Sarajevo. That happened in Sarajevo, in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So this is where World War I started from, or at least it was detonated here. And so if war broke out in Bosnia and Herzegovina, who knows, maybe we would be in World War III now, which would be maybe worse than World War I and World War II combined. Well, what happened since Donald Trump came to power is that all these tensions started to die down and the situation started to improve. And I read about this. I heard it from some Croatian and Serbian politicians and commentators and analysts and so forth. But basically hearsay, people's impressions. And I didn't know really if this was the case or not. But then about 3 weeks ago, I met a member of the Serbian government, the government of the Serbian canton in Bosnia. And I asked him, first person testimonial. I asked him point blank. I said, is it true what I've been hearing? Has the situation in Bosnia improved since Donald Trump came to power? And he shot very categorical, oh yes, definitely. Things are definitely better. The difference now is like day and night. And so he told me that basically they were dealing with the British and that now they're dealing with the Americans, that the British were very aggressive and very adversarial and that the Americans are very accommodating and much more relaxed. But the important part is that the march to war seems to have been arrested. And apparently whoever it is dealing with, I know the name of the man, it just isn't coming to me right now. Whoever is dealing with the Balkans and Bosnia and Herzegovina is extremely knowledgeable about the region and understands the problems exactly. To arrest the march to war, you had to know what's going on. You had to know what the problem is. And you had to take deliberate, purposeful action. It's not a random thing. And then there's also no domestic political constituencies that you have to appease. So this is the litmus test in the sense that the Trump administration has done the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing. And that's very important. So, why? Because, I also, like many people, I had the suspicions that, maybe Trump's controlled the position. I don't know. Maybe he's losing his marbles and he's not, he's 74 years old under a lot of pressure. Who knows? Maybe he's not on top of the game anymore. Maybe his advisors and whoever's in there are being able to dribble him around. But the fact that, the change that's been registered in Bosnia and Herzegovina tells me that he and people in his administration won't know what they're doing, that they're working in the interest of peace, and that he's not controlled opposition. So those are all very encouraging signs. And now, I'm perplexed about Venezuela, and I'm perplexed about, when he visited the King Charles in London and then came out and said, like, oh, yeah, we want the Bagram air base back. In his first administration, he wanted to withdraw American troops from Afghanistan. So if he's now saying, I want Bagram air base back, I don't understand why that is, but it could be that it's just rhetoric and posturing. And then Venezuela, we'll see, if there's no regime change in Venezuela, then what I'm saying is correct, probably. But time will tell. We've seen him also escalate tensions and posturing last summer with Iran, and then there was no war, only a fake one. And then the same thing happened with North Korea in his first term, when it seemed like he was escalating tensions, like something was going to happen in North Korea at the same time as he was sending his delegation to China and to South Korea to organize peace talks. And then they had peace talks, and then he went to North Korea and met with Kim Jong-un, and they had a very good relationship. And then, for the first time in generations, we saw hope of reunification of Korea and peace. And they even began demining the demarcation zone. But then, that was derailed by the neocons in his administration and John Bolton and Mike Pompeo and people like this. But those people are not in the administration anymore. So anyway, long rambling answer. I think that the same deal going down with Ukraine, a similar deal in indirect ways might be hatched for the Middle East. And if the United States is on board, then that's going to happen for sure.
Okay, great. So it seems like Trump coming in has sort of maybe pushed back potential risk of World War III, but then the challenge is, if a Republican or someone more hawkish comes in afterwards, then that could sort of reaccelerate it again. Is that what you're saying?
Not exactly. I think, well, basically you have to, in crafting the American policy, including foreign policy, you have to take a deliberate direction, and you have a choice of two systems. You have the foundation is always economic, right? So you can develop your country to become an industrial powerhouse, or you can go with the British free trade system. And if you become an industrial powerhouse, then you're going to want to export your wares, right? Like your production, you're going to want to trade with other countries. So it's, in terms of foreign policy, it's a choice between being one of the participants in the global trade versus being the enforcement arm of the global empire. Having 700, 800 military bases everywhere around the world, enforcing the rules-based global order, forcing everybody to play by your rules and intimidating them by the force of arms if they don't. Or you can be a producer of goods and services that are actually useful to people so that they want to buy it. And then you trade with Russia, with China, with India, with Australia, with Iran, with everybody. And then you become, the choice of being a global cop or being a polite guest at the global banquet. And, then in terms of economic, that translates, are you the policeman of free trade, global free trade, or are you an industrial nation? Meaning you apply the national system of political economy, as have done the Russians, have done the Chinese, the United States in the 19th century, Germany between 1870 and the First World War, and in every case, you've had rapid rise in productivity, in standards of living, prosperity, even endogenous population growth. With the system of free trade, you have like Dickensian England, the horrors described by Charles Dickens in England or by Upton Sinclair in the United States in late 19th century. So that's your choice, and that's a deliberate choice. So it's not a choice of, maybe if a more hawkish guy comes to the White House, we're going back to war. It's the whole system. It's not how hawkish the guy in the White House is. It's whether the guy in the White House and the ruling establishment is part of the globalist order, or if they are sovereigntists who want their country to prosper and have fair and cordial and constructive relationships with other nations, rather than being the enforcer and the global bully. So that's the choice. It's not in the person or in the group whether they are more hawkish or less hawkish. It's really the choice of a whole system.
Yeah, okay, really interesting. So Alex, thanks so much for your time today. We sort of covered so many parts of geopolitics and what's happening in the world, so appreciate it. But my last question is, what is one message you want people to take away from our conversation?
One message. Well, okay, here would be my message. It's time to be brave. I think that we are in a position where we might really change the course of history. I think what it imposes on us is to keep speaking our minds freely, to simply claim our freedom of speech. So not to ask somebody to grant it to us, to claim it because it's our birthright, to refuse any censorship regime that would, intimidate us. Because I think that with freedom of speech and freedom of thought and freedom of expression, we're going to get to the truth. And truth, well, it's biblical. Truth will set us free. It always takes lies to take us to war. So we have to fight for that truth. And we are, millions of us, fighting to hear it, fighting to speak it, fighting to uncover it. And so it's become a constructive collective endeavor. It's almost like a tsunami of millions of humans trying to find truth. So we have to persevere because we're not out of the woods yet. And I think that we also have to put our heads together to imagine a better future for tomorrow, because ultimately the political class has to bow down to the power of the people. It's important to understand this, because people think like, oh, I'm just an individual, what can I do? Believe me, they wouldn't be spending hundreds of billions of dollars on propaganda if it was all the same what you think. It's not all the same. So that's why they try so hard to lie and deceive and misguide us, because they want us to not know the truth. They want us to not speak the truth. And so every single individual matters greatly to them as well, right? The only way I think we could fail is either if we gave up and surrendered, or if we fell for deception and misdirection that they, keep trying to entrap us with. So rejoice, stand together, continue to fight for the truth. And I think that we can make the world a better place for future generations. And it's a lot to look forward to.
Yeah, it's a great message. As you say, it's trying to be positive in this uncertain world. It's can be challenging, but it's something that's important. So appreciate that message. Alex, thanks again. If anyone wanted to find out more about your work and what you do, where would the best place for that be?
Okay, so I have two publications on Substack. One of them is called iSystem Trend Compass, which is a daily market newsletter covering 18 global markets, including gold and Bitcoin. I have also a personal Substack publication called Alex Krainer's Substack. And I'm also quite active on X. My handle is @NakedHedgy.
Great, perfect. I'll put in below, but thanks again for your time.
Thank you, Anthony. Take care.